What is the perfect way to use up some favorite scraps and make an adorable baby project? I know, today's Patchwork Baby Bib. How cute is it? Hello friends, I'm Shelly from Coral & Co., where I share all my very favorite sewing and quilting projects and tutorials. Before we get started, I would love it if you would take the time to like this video and subscribe. Today, we are going to be making an adorable patchwork baby bib. First, let's go over the materials that you are going to need for this project. You will need an assortment of fat quarters or fabric scraps, approximately 5 to 6. You will also need terry cloth or some chenille or minky, something that is very absorbent. You can use towels. You will also need some Velcro for the closure on the back or some snaps. You will need a rotary blade cutter and a clear plastic ruler. You are also going to need the baby bib pattern, which you can find on my website at coralandco.com. It comes in sizes 0 through 24 months, so we are going to be making a size 3 to 6 month baby bib today. There are several other sizes to choose from, and you may need more squares depending on the size of bib that you choose. But for the newborn and 3 to 6 month bib, you will need 16 3.5 inch squares. So now we're going to go ahead and cut out our 3.5 inch squares. We're going to start by laying our fabric down on our cutting mats. And I am going to lay several pieces of fabric down. You can lay up to 4. And then we're going to get our rotary blade cutter and ruler. So to start with, we are going to make a straight line along the edge. And this is just going to square off our fabric so we have a nice straight line to start with. We are going to turn around our cutting mat and we are going to cut 3.5 inch squares. We're going to line it up so that the 3.5 inch mark is along the edge, and you're going to want to make sure that line is straight right there. And then we are going to cut. And repeat. We can then turn these squares and we will cut the edges off of both sides. Mark 3.5 inches and cut. Pull the scraps away, and you should have 2 to 4 squares of each one depending on how many fabrics you're using. We are going to continue cutting the rest of our fabric. All right, now that we have our variety of fabric squares, we will be lining them up and sorting them out to make the patchwork pattern that we want. To do that, you are going to need to make a 4 by 4 square. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our squares, and we're going to lay 4 out and then continue making 3 more rows of 4. To sew these, we are going to be using the chain piecing method. So what we are going to do is we are going to be sewing in rows, 2 different rows, and then we will be combining these units that we've made with the rows, and then it will make one large patchwork square. So to start with, we are going to place both of these fabrics, the top first and second fabric, right side together. We are going to do that on the second row and the third row and the fourth row. And then we're going to come over to the third and fourth fabric of the first row, and we are going to place the fourth fabric over the third row. The fourth fabric of the second row over the third fabric of the second row, the fourth fabric of the third row over the third fabric of the third row, and then the fourth fabric of the fourth row over the third fabric of the fourth row. And now what we're going to do is we are simply going to stitch using a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down each one of these. And this is called chain piecing. And so there is no need when you sew them through to trim the threads of each of these. You'll simply be able to sew one continuous line. And then we will repeat that for the second row. All right, you ready? Let's get started sewing. We are going to take our first piece and go ahead and sew 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Take your second square and we are going to repeat this. And then we are going to open these and finger press them. And open and finger press these ones as well. Make sure that the seam allowance that you are alternating which way it is facing. So on this side it's going to be facing this way. And this will just help you when you are piecing the final one together. And now we are going to fold it over the top. And then we are going to sew a straight line all the way down here. So now we have the first part of our patchwork. All of our rows are sewn together, and now we're going to sew the columns together. So to do this, we are going to lay it down, and we are going to fold the top one over the bottom one. And we are going to use some pins here. I like to use these fine glass head pins. I think they're really great because they don't leave any holes in your fabric and they're really easy to slip through the fabric. And what we are going to do is we are going to actually nest the seams. So what that means is we are going to have the seam allowance facing opposite directions on each one. So you're going to line up the seam allowance and you are going to take your pin and slide it through on the stitched seam. And then we are going to do that all the way across the column or the row. We're going to do that all the way across the row. To make it even easier on us, we can actually just go ahead and do this row and then the one in the middle. So we will make sure that the seams are facing opposite direction. So this seam, we'll just fold that back for a second. So this seam will be facing to the left. The third seam will be facing to the left. The second seam will be facing to the right underneath. And then we will repeat that with the fourth seam. So the first and the third seams are facing to the left, and the second and the fourth seams are facing to the right. Now we have our patchwork square made. We are going to take our patchwork square and we are going to give it a little press. So what we're going to do is we're going to be pressing all of these seam allowances in the back to make them lie nice and flat. You are going to start by pressing the seam allowances on the rows as lightly as you can. If you come to one like this that is facing kind of two different ways, just give it a little bit of a snip. Make sure you do not trim into the stitch, and then press it the way that you would like it to face. And once we have done that, we're going to go back and we are going to press these columns down, the row connectors down. And you just want to press lightly. You do not want to be pressing really hard because that may distort the fabric. So just press lightly, allowing the seam allowances to lay to one side or the other. Give it one more press on the top just to make sure that all of the seams are lying nice and flat. And we just want to gently press. We do not want to be pulling the fabric, otherwise it might distort and get a little wavy. Make sure that it is open all the way. You may find a little crease like that, so try to make sure that the fabric is open all the way. Now we are going to take our patchwork piece and lay it down, and we're actually going to fold it in half. And we are going to place our pattern piece on top on the fold line. And you may want to pin it in place just to keep it from moving while you cut it. And then you're going to take either your scissors or rotary blade cutter, and you are simply going to cut around the baby bib pattern template. Now that we have our patchwork bib front, we are going to go ahead and cut out the bib shape out of our terry cloth. Fold the terry cloth in half, place the bib shape over the top, placing the fold line on the fold. And if you'd like, you can pin it in place to keep it from moving. Just a couple of pins will do. And then you are going to go ahead and cut out the bib shape from the terry cloth. Set the terry cloth aside and go ahead and unpin the pattern from the front. And now we should have our terry cloth backing. So we are going to go ahead and lay the terry cloth backing, and there really isn't a right side or a wrong side to the terry cloth. So you can use either side when we say put right sides together. So we are going to lay the terry cloth down, and then we are going to go ahead and place the bib face down, so right sides together. And we are going to pin all of these in place. And we're going to leave a hole for the opening, which we turn the bib when we go ahead and turn it right side out. To leave the hole, I like to place my pins vertically because this helps me remember when I'm sewing to stop right here and not sew over them. Not that we sew over pins in the first place, but it really just reminds me to stop. And then go ahead and pin or clip in place the bib. Make sure that when you are pinning the curves that you pin a little extra, a little closer together, because those curves really like to kind of wiggle around and get loose. They like to shift. So I like to pin probably about every inch or so. Sometimes a little bit less, just depending on how the angle of the curve is. I like to use these glass head pins. I think that they are perfect for just about any sewing project. And the reason that I really like them, they are glass head, which means that if you're ironing over them, that they are not going to melt. But these are the fine glass head pins, and although they do bend very easily, so if you're using really thick fabrics, these are not going to be the pin that you want to use. But for almost all projects, I think that because they have a really fine tip, that they slip into the fabric a lot easier. And also, they don't leave any big holes in your fabric, which is really important. Now that we have pinned the bib or clipped the bib in place, we are going to go ahead and sew, starting on the edge where we marked the opening, and we're going to go ahead and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around the circumference of the bib, stopping at the top. Remember, you're going to want to backstitch to secure the thread in place to start. Be sure to sew slowly around these really small curves, lifting the presser foot when you need to pivot. And when we get back to the first pin that we marked for the opening, go ahead and take that out and then backstitch one more time to secure in place. Now we are going to go ahead and take our scissors and we are going to clip the curves of the opening. On the outer curves, we are going to go ahead and just make little V notches. And then on the inner curves, we're just going to make small straight snips. This is going to help when we turn the bib right side out. This will leave the bib without any puckers and it will fold over and the seams will sit really nicely. And if any part of your bib does not line up perfectly, if there's a little bit extra of any one layer, particularly the terry cloth, just go ahead and trim away that excess seam allowance. All right, now you're going to get your turning point tool. This is an actual turning point tool. However, you can simply use a pencil. You don't have to have a turning point tool. This is just a fancy tool. So we're going to go ahead and turn our bib right side out. The turning point tool simply helps push out the corners when you are turning a piece that has little itty bitty corners that are hard to get to. So this is where you're going to want to grab your turning point tool and you're going to simply want to push all those little tiny corners of your seam allowance. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and actually roll the fabric along the seam allowance as well to try to get it to sit just a little bit flatter. And then you can do this on the inside seam allowance as well. All right, next up, we have turned our bib right side out. So we are going to go ahead and grab our iron and we are going to press it nice and flat to set those seam allowances and then also give it a nice professional finish. And then, of course, we are going to turn in these edges and press them as well so they sit nice and flat. We are going to just lightly press. We don't want to pull the fabric. We just want to press nice and light. And we're just going to help set these seams so they're not wonky and there's no puckers. And here we are going to tuck these in, particularly the top one. We're going to tuck in this top one and we're just going to give it a nice little press so that when we go to pin it in place, the fabric is already set. It just makes it a little bit easier to work with. Right, now we're going to get our pins and Like I said, I am using glass head pins so that I actually can place these pins in here and set my iron over them, and the iron will not melt the head of my pin. Or the ball head. Okay. Now we have this set in place, and I can iron it flat one more time. And now we're going to finish the bib off by giving it a beautiful top stitch. And this is just going to create a lovely professional finish. And then we are going to add our Velcro to create the closure. You, of course, can use cam snaps, which are little plastic snaps, or regular snaps. I think the Velcro is just the easiest to apply, and I'm already sewing and I don't have to have any extra tools. When top stitching, you're going to want to use about 1/8 inch of a seam allowance. So you're almost going to want to sew as close to the seam edge as you can. Don't forget to backstitch to secure in place. The top stitching is also going to allow us to secure and close our opening. So now we are going to cut one 1-inch piece of Velcro. Make sure that you have a front and a back piece. We're going to take the front piece of the neck closure and we are just going to pin the Velcro to secure it. And then we are going to take the opposite back piece of the neck closure and we are going to pin the Velcro there as well to secure it. And then these should line up. And now you are going to sew along the outer perimeter of the Velcro. Remember to backstitch to secure in place. Remove the needle so you do not sew over it. And I like to make a X as well as sewing around the perimeter. I just find that this adds a little extra security to your Velcro. And secure in place one more time. And there you have it. You have created a beautiful patchwork baby bib that is both functional and stylish. This is the perfect project for you to use up all those little scraps you have laying around. Thank you for joining me today. Happy sewing. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And I will see you next time.